The northern waters of the Barents Sea, 1941. Here, amidst the icy expanses and the northern lights, the fate not only of the Soviet Arctic but of the entire war was being decided. Arseniy Grigorievich Golovko, Rear Admiral, stood on the bridge of the flagship, peering into the leaden waves. At 36, he took command of the Northern Fleet, the youngest and perhaps the most vulnerable among all the fleets of the Soviet Union. The Arctic, a theater of military operations that forgives no mistakes. A harsh climate where temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero, gale-force winds of up to 30 meters per second, a polar night lasting for months. In these conditions, Golovko had to defend a strategically important region, the gateway for Allied convoys carrying vital cargo, tanks, aircraft, food, medicine. The German command perfectly understood the significance of the Northern Sea route. Cutting off this artery meant depriving the USSR of critically important Allied aid, isolating the country, stifling its economy. For this purpose, the enemy concentrated a powerful grouping in Norway. The battleship Tirpitz, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and aviation. A boy from the Cossack village of Kardonikskaya in Kuban could not even dream of the sea. Arseniy Golovko was born in 1906 into a simple peasant family, far from the sea expanses that were destined to become his fate. His childhood fell during the years of revolutionary turmoil and the Civil War, which hardened the character of the future admiral from an early age. At 17, the young man joined the Komsomol, and at 22, he linked his life with the fleet, enrolling in the Frunze Naval School in Leningrad. Even then, teachers noted his outstanding abilities, analytical mind, and leadership qualities. Golovko received his first officer's epaulets in 1928. His career developed rapidly. Commander of a destroyer's mine sector, senior assistant commander, and then ship commander. In the 30s, he graduated from the Naval Academy, which opened the way to staff work and higher command positions. Fate gave Golovko unique experience, directing him to serve in all fleets of the Soviet Union. He learned the specifics of the Baltic, the harshness of the northern seas, the peculiarities of the Black Sea and the Far East. This versatile experience shaped him into an officer with broad strategic thinking, capable of seeing the entire picture of the country's naval defense. In 1937, when a wave of repressions swept through the fleet, Golovko, thanks to his integrity and professionalism, not only survived, but also received an appointment as commander of the Caspian Flotilla. A year later, he already headed the Amur military flotilla. A turning point in Arseniy Grigorievich's fate was July 1940, when he was appointed commander of the Northern Fleet. At 34, he became the youngest naval commander of such rank in the history of the Soviet Navy. Many viewed this appointment skeptically. Too young, inexperienced for such responsibility. But time showed the wisdom of this decision. By June 1941, the USSR's Northern Fleet, despite its youth, already represented a serious combat force. Under the command of Arseniy Golovko were 8 destroyers, 15 submarines, 7 patrol ships, as well as a number of minesweepers and submarine chasers. Coastal defense was provided by artillery batteries and air cover by about 160 naval aviation aircraft, predominantly outdated models. The main base of the fleet was Polyarny, a small town 40 kilometers from Murmansk. The infrastructure was underdeveloped. There was a lack of docks, repair shops, warehouses, and housing for personnel. Many sailors lived in dugouts and hastily built barracks. The harsh climatic conditions of the Arctic created additional difficulties. The polar night, extreme frosts, frequent storms. From the first days of his command, Golovko recognized the strategic vulnerability of the region. Finland, with which the war had recently ended, was dangerously close. Norway had been occupied by the Germans in April 1940, allowing the Wehrmacht to establish naval and air bases practically at the Soviet borders. Intelligence reported the concentration of German troops in northern Norway and Finland. In the pre-war months, the admiral meticulously prepared the fleet for possible hostilities. He personally inspected ships, conducted exercises in conditions as close to combat as possible, demanding from commanders a precise knowledge of the characteristics of the northern seas. Special attention was paid to the camouflage of ships and coastal objects, the creation of reserve positions, and the organization of air defense. On the night of June 22, 1941, Golovko was in his office at the fleet headquarters. Upon receiving the message about the German attack, he immediately ordered the fleet to be brought to full combat readiness. Ships took up positions, anti-aircraft batteries occupied firing points, and the air defense of the bases was strengthened. Already in the first hours of the war, the admiral clearly understood the main tasks: the defense of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, the only ice-free ports in the north of the country, through which aid from Western allies could arrive, the defense of sea communications, preventing the landing of German amphibious forces on the coast, supporting ground forces with naval artillery fire. In these critical days, Golovko's best qualities as a commander were revealed: composure, the ability to make quick decisions, and the skill to inspire subordinates by personal example. He understood a long and difficult struggle lay ahead against a strong and experienced enemy in the extreme conditions of the Arctic. But he also believed in the steadfastness of his sailors and their ability to defend the northern borders of the motherland. June 22, 1941, forever changed the life of the country. For the Northern Fleet, the war began not with massive bombardments, as on the western borders, but with an alarming combat alert signal. At 4 in the morning, Arseniy Golovko received a cipher message from Moscow and immediately brought the fleet to full combat readiness. Ships left their bays, taking up positions to repel possible enemy attacks. Anti-aircraft crews took their places. Camouflage nets covered the most important infrastructure facilities. The Germans delivered their first blow from the air. On the morning of June 22nd, enemy aircraft attempted to attack Polyarny and Murmansk, but were met with organized anti-aircraft fire. Golovko personally directed the defense, being at the command post and coordinating the actions of the fleet and coastal batteries. Already in this first engagement, his command style became evident: coolness in critical situations and the ability to quickly regroup forces. By the end of June, the main threat emerged: the German Army Group Norway, under the command of Colonel General Nikolaus von Falkenhorst, began an offensive on Murmansk. Finnish troops attacked in the Kandalaksha and Ukta directions. Red Army ground units retreated under the pressure of superior enemy forces. In this critical situation, Golovko made a decision that many considered risky: to use naval artillery to support ground forces. The destroyers Kuibyshev and Uritsky entered Motovsky Bay and opened fire on the advancing German units. Accurate salvos from naval guns halted the enemy's advance on the coastal flank. Simultaneously, Golovko organized naval landings behind the advancing German troops. Marine infantry detachments landed on the coast of the Sredny and Rybachi peninsulas, striking at enemy communications. These audacious raids forced the German command to withdraw part of its forces from the main direction of attack. By mid-July, it became clear that the blitzkrieg in the Arctic had failed. The Germans were stopped at the western Litsa River, 30 kilometers from Murmansk. The city, which Hitler planned to capture in the first days of the war, remained Soviet. This was a huge merit of the Northern Fleet and its commander. Maritime communications in the Arctic became a true lifeline for the Soviet Union during the war years. Arseniy Golovko, understood this better than anyone. When the first Allied convoy, Dervish, arrived in Arkhangelsk in September 1941, delivering fighters, rubber, tin, and other strategic cargo, the commander of the Northern Fleet personally met the British sailors. "These sea routes must operate without interruption," the admiral told his officers. "Otherwise, we will be deprived of tanks, aircraft, provisions, and medicines vital for the front." Golovko developed a comprehensive system for convoy protection. As they approached Soviet territorial waters, they were met by Northern Fleet ships, which took over escorting duties. To counter German submarines, anti-submarine defense lines were established, where patrol ships and small submarine chasers were on duty. Naval aviation patrolled the airspace, searching for enemy submarines and aircraft. Special attention was paid to interaction with the Allies. Golovko established direct contact with British Admiral John Tovey, commander of the Home Fleet. An exchange of information about the movement of German ships, anti-submarine warfare tactics, and meteorological conditions in the Arctic was arranged between Soviet and British sailors. "We speak different languages, but we understand each other with half a word," Golovko once remarked after a meeting with the captain of a British destroyer. A special group of officers, exclusively responsible for organizing convoy operations, was created at the Northern Fleet headquarters. They developed routes, calculated transit times through dangerous areas, and coordinated the actions of escort ships and aviation. The Germans, realizing the importance of Arctic communications, concentrated significant forces in the region. Admiral Donitz's submarines hunted transports, bombers attacked convoys from the air, and surface raiders sallied forth from Norwegian fjords to intercept them. Under these conditions, Golovko proved himself a master of naval strategy. He constantly changed convoy protection tactics, preventing the enemy from developing effective countermeasures. Sometimes he reinforced air cover, sometimes he advanced patrol ships further out to sea, sometimes he used smoke screens to mask vessels. Thanks to these measures, in the first year of the war, Allied convoy losses in the Northern Fleet's area of responsibility were minimal. The Arctic route worked, delivering vital cargo to the USSR. It became a true artery, nourishing the Soviet war machine. The defense system of the Soviet Arctic, created by Arseniy Golovko, became a true shield of the Arctic. The admiral developed a multi-layered defense strategy that included naval, air, and ground components, operating as a single mechanism. At the heart of this system was Murmansk, an ice-free port of critical importance for the entire country. Golovko organized the city's defense with particular meticulousness. The approaches to Murmansk were covered by naval patrols, and artillery batteries were positioned on the commanding heights. Destroyers of the Northern Fleet regularly went out to sea to shell the positions of German troops advancing on the city. The admiral would say, directing ships for artillery support of the 14th Army, which was holding back the onslaught of the German Army Group. Golovko paid special attention to coastal defense. Under his leadership, a chain of artillery batteries was created, covering the approaches to naval bases and key ports. Powerful guns were installed on the Rybachi and Sredny peninsulas, controlling the entrance to the Kola Bay. These positions became an impregnable bastion. Throughout the war, the Germans failed to capture them, despite numerous attempts. The admiral personally inspected the fortifications, often appearing on the front line under enemy fire. He would reply to officers' warnings about the risk. A crucial element of the defense was the interaction between the fleet and aviation. Golovko achieved the creation of a unified command that coordinated the actions of naval aviation and the air forces of the Karelian front. Bombers and fighters covered ships at sea, attacked German airfields and submarine bases in northern Norway. An innovative solution was the creation of air convoys. groups of fighters accompanying transport ships in particularly dangerous areas of the route. This tactic significantly reduced losses from German air attacks. The Northern Fleet, under Golovko's command, conducted active reconnaissance, using small ships, submarines, and aviation. Thanks to this, the fleet headquarters always had up-to-date information on enemy movements, which allowed them to anticipate his actions. In the conditions of the polar night and extreme weather, Golovko developed special combat tactics. Ships learned to maneuver in stormy seas, crews trained to operate in limited visibility, in icing conditions and severe frosts. The German command was forced to acknowledge the effectiveness of the Soviet Arctic's defense. In his memoirs, Admiral Raeder wrote, "The Russians created an impregnable fortress in the Arctic, which we were never able to break." The Arctic Shield, forged by Golovko, not only protected the northern borders of the motherland, but also ensured the operation of a vital transport artery through which Allied aid flowed. This was made possible by the Admiral's strategic talent and the heroism of the North Sea sailors, who managed to turn the harsh Arctic into an insurmountable frontier for the enemy. July of 1942 became one of the most tragic pages in the history of Arctic convoys. Convoy PQ-17, consisting of 35 transport ships, departed from Iceland and headed towards Soviet shores. The British Admiralty, having received false intelligence about the German battleship Tirpitz putting to sea, made a fatal decision: to disperse the convoy and recall the escort ships. The vessels were left unprotected in the middle of the Barents Sea, where German submarines and aircraft awaited them. When Arseniy Golovko received information about what had happened, he immediately issued an order. All available forces of the Northern Fleet must go out to meet the solitary ships. Despite limited resources, the Admiral organized a rescue operation of unprecedented scale. Soviet destroyers, patrol ships, and aircraft went far beyond their usual area of responsibility. "We must do the impossible," Golovko said at an emergency meeting at the fleet headquarters. "Every ship saved means tanks and planes for the front. It means the lives of our soldiers." The Northern Fleet managed to save 11 ships of convoy PQ-17. When the surviving captains arrived at the fleet headquarters, many of them tearfully thanked the Soviet sailors for their rescue. One of the British officers later recalled, "The Russians acted with incredible bravery. Their ships and planes appeared where we no longer hoped to see help." The lessons of the PQ-17 tragedy were thoroughly analyzed by Golovko. He insisted on the creation of mixed planning groups for convoy operations, where Soviet and British officers jointly developed routes and escort tactics. The Admiral personally met with Allied representatives, seeking closer coordination of actions. In subsequent convoy operations, the Northern Fleet employed a new tactic of deep echeloned defense. Submarines advanced to the distant approaches of the convoy routes, identifying German submarines. Aircraft expanded their patrol zones, and ship patrols became more mobile. These measures significantly reduced losses in subsequent convoys. In the winter of 1942–43, convoy operations faced new challenges. The polar night, severe storms, temperatures below 30 degrees Celsius. In these conditions, sailors had not only to repel enemy attacks, but also to battle the elements. Golovko demanded special training from crews for winter conditions. Ships stocked up on de-icing agents, and methods for combating icing of weapons and mechanisms were developed. Submarine warfare in the Arctic became one of the most intense areas of confrontation in the northern maritime theater. From the first days of the war, Arseniy Golovko recognized the particular danger that German submarines posed to Arctic communications. In the waters of the Barents Sea, where temperatures rarely rose above 4 degrees, and visibility was often limited by fogs and snow squalls, the submarine became an ideal hunter. Submarine warfare is a blind chess game, where the price of a mistake is human lives and sunken ships, the admiral told his officers at one of the staff meetings. Golovko developed a multi-layered anti-submarine defense system. The first line was long-range patrols, small hunters and patrol boats equipped with hydroacoustic stations. They patrolled the approaches to the main convoy routes, detecting enemy submarines at long range. The second echelon of defense consisted of anti-submarine screens, groups of ships arranged in a specific order and blocking the most likely paths for German submarines to reach attacking positions. These screens constantly changed their location, preventing the enemy from developing effective tactics to bypass them. Aviation played a special role in anti-submarine warfare. On Golovko's initiative, special squadrons were formed, equipped with seaplanes and bombers adapted for searching for and destroying submarines. Pilots trained to detect submarines by barely noticeable traces on the water's surface: oil slicks, foamy wakes, condensation trails from diesels. The admiral understood that success in submarine warfare depended not only on technology, but also on people. He established special anti-submarine defense courses in the fleet, where officers and sailors studied the peculiarities of acoustics in Arctic waters, the characteristics of German submarines, and their tactics. Golovko did not limit himself to defense. He actively used his own submarine forces to strike at enemy communications. Soviet submariners operated off the coast of occupied Norway, attacking German transports delivering supplies for Army Group North. The legendary submarine K-21, under the command of Captain Second-Rank Lunin, managed to torpedo the German battleship Tirpitz, the pride of the Kriegsmarine. Although the damage did not put the ship out of action for long, this audacious strike forced the German command to use its large surface ships in Arctic waters with greater caution. In the winter of 1942, Golovko introduced a new tactic: wolf packs of Soviet submarines. Groups of 3 or 4 submarines operated in coordination, covering vast areas and attacking detected enemy convoys. This tactic, previously successfully employed by the Germans in the Atlantic, was now turned against them. Admiral Golovko was not merely a talented strategist, but also an outstanding leader, whose management methods allowed the Northern Fleet to endure in the incredibly difficult conditions of Arctic warfare. His command style represented a rare combination of strict demandingness and deep respect for his subordinates. Sailors of the Northern Fleet spoke of him with particular reverence. Golovko is harsh but fair. With him, it's like being behind a stone wall. One of the admiral's key leadership principles was accessibility. Despite his high rank, he always found time to personally communicate with officers and sailors. One could often see the fleet commander appearing on a ship without warning, conversing with the crew, inquiring not only about combat training but also about living conditions and the mood of the sailors. A commander should know his people not from reports but from personal interaction, Golovko told his officers. This simple truth underpinned his management philosophy. During the most difficult moments of the war, the admiral personally went to sea on ships participating in convoy operations, sharing all dangers with his subordinates. Golovko's leadership qualities were particularly evident during crisis situations. When a critical situation arose near Murmansk in 1942 and German troops approached the city closely, the admiral took on the coordination of actions not only of the fleet, but also of ground units. His composure and decisiveness in those days inspired everyone, from generals to ordinary soldiers. Golovko possessed the rare gift of making unconventional decisions under conditions of limited time and resources. When there was a shortage of anti-submarine ships, he ordered fishing trawlers to be converted into patrol vessels. When a problem arose with delivering fuel and ammunition to remote positions, the admiral organized the transportation of cargo by submarines, which could operate covertly even under conditions of complete enemy air superiority. The story of organizing ship repairs amidst continuous bombing is remarkable. Golovko ordered the creation of floating repair workshops that could quickly change their location, escaping enemy air attacks. This innovative idea allowed the fleet's ship composition to be maintained in combat-ready condition even during the most difficult periods of the war. The admiral paid special attention to the psychological preparation of personnel. He understood that in the conditions of the Arctic, where the polar night lasts for months and temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero, morale is crucial. At his initiative, concerts were regularly held on ships and in coastal units. Naval propaganda brigades operated, and newspapers and combat leaflets were published. A sailor must know what he is fighting for and what awaits him at home. These words of Golovko defined his approach to educational work. He personally ensured that the families of fallen sailors received all possible wartime assistance and support. The admiral knew how to find common ground with allies. British and American officers noted his diplomatic talent and ability to resolve the most complex issues of interaction between the fleets of different countries. At the same time, Golovko always firmly defended the interests of his country and his fleet. Arseniy Golovko's leadership in the extreme conditions of the Arctic became a school for an entire generation of Soviet naval officers. Many of those who served under him subsequently held high positions in the Navy and made significant contributions to its post-war development. The Admiral of the Arctic showed that true leadership is manifested not in office work, but in the ability to lead people through the most severe trials, preserving their faith in victory and a sense of human dignity. The Arctic waters demanded from the Northern Fleet not only courage, but also technological innovation. Admiral Golovko perfectly understood. To win the war in the Arctic, the heroism of sailors alone was not enough. New technical solutions and tactical methods, adapted to the harsh polar conditions, were needed. One of the main problems was the icing of ships. At temperatures below -20 degrees, seawater hitting the deck and superstructures instantly turned into ice, which could reach a thickness of several tens of centimeters. This not only hampered the crew's work, but also created a dangerous list, threatening to capsize the vessel. At Golovko's initiative, special anti-icing systems were introduced on Northern Fleet ships. Steam lines were routed to the most critical areas of the deck and superstructures, ensuring their heating. Special compounds were developed for coating metal surfaces, reducing ice adhesion. Crews received special equipment for combating icing, light picks and scrapers, allowing for quick removal of ice from important mechanisms. Seawater and Arctic cold are our main adversaries, besides the Germans, Golovko said at meetings with ship commanders. We must learn to conquer the elements just as we learn to conquer the enemy. Particular attention was paid to improving enemy detection systems. In conditions of polar night and frequent fogs, traditional observation methods proved ineffective. Golovko secured the delivery of the latest British-made radar stations to the Northern Fleet, arriving via Lend-Lease. Soviet engineers adapted them for operation in Arctic conditions, creating special heated housings for antennas and electronic units. A unique hydroacoustic surveillance system was developed, considering the peculiarities of sound propagation in cold Arctic waters. Fleet specialists created maps of hydrological anomalies in the Barents Sea, allowing for more accurate determination of enemy submarine locations. The Admiral personally supported inventors and rationalizers. when a young engineer proposed a modification of depth charges for use in dense ice conditions, Golovko immediately ordered tests and then the implementation of the invention into combat practice. Tactical innovations were no less important. Golovko developed the concept of wandering batteries, mobile artillery units that constantly changed positions along the coast, preventing the enemy from detecting their location. These batteries delivered sudden strikes against German ships attempting to approach the Soviet coast. A system of false targets was created, inflatable and wooden mock-ups of ships equipped with thermal imitators and radio transmitters. They were placed in fjords and bays, diverting German airstrikes. A special achievement was the development of tactics for operations in conditions of polar night. Crews trained to perform all operations in complete darkness, using only night vision devices and navigation tools. This allowed for daring raids behind enemy lines, when German ships and bases became particularly vulnerable. By 1943, the war in the Arctic entered a new phase. The Northern Fleet, under the command of Arseniy Golovko, having successfully repelled German attempts to capture Murmansk and cut off sea communications, transitioned from defense to active offensive operations. This turning point was due both to the general change in the strategic situation on the Soviet-German front after the Battle of Stalingrad and to the increased power of the Northern Fleet itself. The time has come to show the enemy that the Arctic is not only our fortress, but also our springboard for strikes. These words of Golovko, spoken at a Fleet Military Council in the spring of 1943, defined the new strategy of action for the Northern Fleet sailors. The first targets of the offensive operations were German sea communications along the coast of occupied Norway. Along these routes, the enemy delivered reinforcements and supplies for its grouping in the Arctic, as well as strategic raw materials, nickel and molybdenum, from Finnish mines. Golovko developed a comprehensive plan to disrupt these communications, involving all forces of the fleet. Submarines went to distant positions near the Norwegian fjords. Torpedo boats carried out daring night raids, and naval aviation struck enemy ports and ships. A particular success was the operation to destroy a German convoy off Cape Nordkapp in July 1943. Northern Fleet intelligence received information about the movement of a large convoy with military cargo. Golovko personally planned a combined strike. First, submarines attacked the convoy on approach, then naval aviation entered the battle, and torpedo boats completed the route. Of the 11 transports and escort ships of the enemy, 8 were sunk, and the rest suffered serious damage. Another important direction of offensive operations was naval landings. Unlike large-scale landing operations in the Black Sea, in the conditions of the Arctic, Golovko relied on small but well-trained marine units. These groups landed behind enemy lines, destroyed coastal batteries and radar stations, disrupted communications, and gathered intelligence. The raid of Captain Barchenko Emelianov's detachment, which landed in September 1943 in the Petsamo area, became legendary. The Marines penetrated deep into enemy territory, destroyed several important targets, and captured valuable documents from the German headquarters. Golovko personally met the heroes of this operation and presented many of them with high awards. By the autumn of 1943, the Northern Fleet had effectively established operational dominance in the eastern part of the Barents Sea. This allowed for the planning of a large-scale offensive operation to liberate the Soviet Arctic. Golovko was included in the group of senior commanders who developed the plan for the future Petsamo-Kirkenes operation. In the autumn of 1944, the Arctic bore witness to one of the most impressive military operations of the Great Patriotic War. The Petsamo-Kirkenes Offensive, conceived with the direct involvement of Admiral Golovko, was intended to finally liberate the Soviet Arctic and transfer combat operations to Norwegian territory. The complexity of the task was exacerbated by extreme conditions: mountainous terrain, numerous fjords, swamps, and tundra, as well as the approaching polar night. Arseniy Grigorievich understood that the success of the operation depended on the ideal coordination of all branches of the armed forces. For the first time in the history of Soviet military art, it was necessary to organize such a large-scale interaction of ground forces, aviation, and the fleet in the far north. Golovko personally led the naval component of the operation, developing a detailed plan of action for ships and marines. The fleet must become not just support but the striking fist of the offensive, the admiral declared at a command meeting. He proposed a bold idea: to land amphibious assaults behind German fortifications, disrupting the enemy's defense system and ensuring the rapid advance of ground forces. Preparation for the operation proceeded in an atmosphere of strict secrecy. Golovko personally inspected the training of paratroopers practicing landings on rocky shores. The fleet's ships were re-equipped for operations near enemy shores. Artillery armament was strengthened, and additional anti-aircraft defense systems were installed. On October 7, 1944, the operation began. Troops of the Karelian Front went on the offensive, while ships of the Northern Fleet under Golovko's command secured the flanks, conducted artillery fire on enemy coastal fortifications, and prepared for amphibious landings. On October 10th, a critical moment of the operation arrived. Ground forces met fierce resistance on the "1" line, where the Germans had created powerful fortifications. Golovko decided to land troops in the port of Liinakamari, a key point of the enemy's defense. This was a risky move. The landing party had to operate in a narrow fjord, which was swept by German artillery fire. The admiral personally developed the operation plan, providing for a diversionary maneuver and powerful fire support. On the night of October 12th, torpedo boats with Marines on board burst into Liinakamari harbor. Simultaneously, destroyers of the Northern Fleet opened hurricane fire on enemy coastal batteries. The landing was made, and despite fierce resistance, the port was captured. The success of this audacious operation predetermined the outcome of the entire offensive. The German defense was breached, and Soviet troops rapidly advanced. On October 14th, the city of Pechenga, was liberated, and on October 25th, the Norwegian city of Kirkenes. Golovko did not rest on his laurels. By his order, ships of the Northern Fleet continued to land tactical amphibious assaults along the Norwegian coast, preventing the enemy from consolidating new positions. Naval aviation struck retreating German columns, and submarines blockaded evacuation sea routes. The Petsamo-Kirkenes operation became a triumph of military art and a personal triumph for Admiral Golovko. His ability to organize the interaction of disparate forces in the extreme conditions of the Arctic received high praise from the Supreme High Command. By decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on September 25, 1944, Arseniy Grigorievich Golovko was awarded the rank of Admiral. The war in the Arctic had a special human dimension. For Arseniy Golovko, caring for people always remained a priority, even when it came to performing combat missions. Equipment without people is dead, and in the conditions of the Arctic, man remains the main value. The Admiral often repeated to his officers. These words embodied his management philosophy, which allowed the Northern Fleet to withstand the most severe trials. The daily life of sailors in the Arctic was incredibly difficult. Air temperature in winter dropped to 40 degrees below zero, the polar night lasted for months, and stormy winds literally knocked people off their feet. On ships, especially small ones, conditions were even harsher. Icing of decks and superstructures, constant dampness in compartments, cramped spaces. Golovko personally inspected living conditions on every ship and in every coastal unit. He demanded strict adherence from commanders to crew nutrition standards, especially regarding vitamin-containing products. At his insistence, onions, garlic, and sauerkraut, natural sources of vitamin C, which helped combat scurvy, were supplied to the fleet on a priority basis. Uniforms posed a particular problem. Standard naval uniforms were not designed for extreme Arctic conditions. Golovko achieved the development and production of special clothing for Arctic sailors: insulated pea coats, ear flap hats with face protection, special mittens, and boots. I cannot demand that a sailor stand watch for 8 hours in 30-degree frost if he is not protected from the cold, the admiral declared at one of the meetings in Moscow, advocating for priority supplies of winter uniforms. Equally important was the psychological support of personnel. Golovko perfectly understood that the polar night, isolation, and constant danger created an enormous psychological burden. On his initiative, a network of cultural and educational institutions was created in the fleet. Clubs, libraries, and film projectors. Even at the most remote points of coastal defense, concert brigades regularly performed. The admiral encouraged sports competitions between ship crews and units. In winter, ski races and hockey matches were held, and in summer, football tournaments and swimming competitions. These events not only maintained the physical fitness of the sailors, but also strengthened combat camaraderie. Golovko paid special attention to medical support. An effective system for evacuating the wounded from ships and remote coastal positions was created in the fleet. Hospitals were equipped with the most modern equipment for that time, and medical personnel underwent special training in treating frostbite, specific Arctic diseases, and combat injuries. Fleet losses were inevitable in wartime. Golovko experienced every loss as a personal tragedy. He kept in memory the names of fallen ship commanders and distinguished sailors. The admiral considered it his duty to personally write letters to the families of deceased sailors, finding words of comfort and support. Methods for preserving the lives of personnel were constantly improved. Golovko demanded meticulous planning of every operation with minimized risk to people. A system was developed for training crews for emergency situations, fighting for ship survivability, evacuation during fire or flooding, and survival in icy water. Caring for people yielded results. Despite the most difficult conditions, the morale of the Northern Fleet remained high throughout the war. Sailors knew that the commander would do everything possible to provide them with the necessary support and protection. This confidence allowed them to perform the most complex and dangerous tasks. The victorious year of 45 was for Arseniy Golovko, not the end of his service but the beginning of a new stage. The Northern Fleet, tempered in battles, had become a powerful fighting force. But it required deep modernization in the conditions of the nascent Cold War. The admiral, who had gained invaluable experience in Arctic battles, now directed his energy to strengthening the country's naval shield in the polar latitudes. The primary task was to restore the destroyed infrastructure. The ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, which had been subjected to regular bombings, needed major reconstruction. Golovko personally supervised the construction of new berths, repair docks, and coastal facilities. At his initiative, the creation of a system of underground shelters for ships began, capable of protecting the fleet in the event of a nuclear strike. The admiral said at meetings with the fleet's command staff, his strategic vision included not only increasing combat power, but also creating a comprehensive basing system capable of ensuring the constant presence of Soviet ships throughout the entire water area of the Arctic Ocean. Golovko paid special attention to the development of the submarine fleet. The experience of the war showed that in Arctic conditions, submarines became an ideal tool for naval strategy. At his insistence, the newest Project 613 submarines, and later the first nuclear submarines, were sent to the Northern Fleet as a priority. The Admiral developed the concept of Arctic submarine patrolling, which involved the constant presence of Soviet submarines in strategically important areas of the Arctic. To implement this idea, it was necessary to solve many technical problems related to underwater navigation, communication, and crew survival in extreme conditions. Golovko actively supported scientific research in the Arctic. At his initiative, a special hydrographic expedition of the Northern Fleet was created, which studied the features of the Arctic seas. The data obtained were used to compile accurate maps, develop methods for under-ice navigation, and create navigation support systems. The most important direction of the Admiral's activity was the formation of a new USSR naval doctrine in the northern waters. Golovko was one of the first to realize the strategic importance of the Arctic in the nuclear age. He developed the concept of an Arctic bastion, a protected area in the Barents Sea where Soviet ballistic missile submarines could safely patrol. The name of Arseniy Grigorievich Golovko is forever inscribed in the heroic annals of the Russian Navy. The Admiral of the Arctic, as he is often called, created in the harsh Arctic waters not just a combat formation, but an entire school of naval art, relevant even in the 21st century. Golovko's military career became a model of an officer's professional growth. From cadet to admiral, from commander of a small ship to head of the fleet, every stage of this path was marked by impeccable service and innovative solutions. His main talent was the ability to adapt classical principles of naval strategy to the extreme conditions of the Arctic, creating new tactical methods and organizational forms. The Admiral's legacy includes not only military victories, but also fundamental principles of Arctic navigation, the methods of operation in polar conditions developed under his leadership, systems for ensuring the survivability of ships at extreme temperatures, tactics of anti-submarine warfare in ice conditions. All this constitutes the golden fund of naval science. Of particular value is the system for training personnel for operations in the Arctic, created by Golovko. He understood that the human factor in polar latitudes becomes decisive. This principle became the basis of a special Northern Sea School of sailor training. Golovko's strategic vision was far ahead of its time. Already in the 40s, he predicted the increasing role of the Arctic in world politics and economics. The infrastructure of the Northern Fleet created by him laid the foundation for modern Russian presence in high latitudes. Many bases and basing points designed with his participation continue to function today. The Admiral's contribution to the development of international naval cooperation is also difficult to overestimate. His experience of interaction with British and American sailors during the escort of Arctic convoys became an invaluable asset for post-war diplomacy. Golovko proved that even in conditions of ideological differences, effective cooperation at sea is possible for common goals. In modern Russia, the memory of the Admiral of the Arctic is carefully preserved. Streets in several cities, a combat ship of the Northern Fleet, and educational institutions bear his name. His memoirs have become a desktop book for many generations of naval officers. However, the main monument to Arseniy Golovko remains the Northern Fleet itself, a powerful formation ensuring Russia's security in the Arctic region. Modern nuclear submarine cruisers, missile ships, and naval aviation continue the work started by the Admiral in the harsh war years. Golovko's legacy is especially relevant today, when the Arctic is once again becoming an arena of geopolitical rivalry. His strategic concepts and tactical developments are studied in naval academies, and his experience in fleet management in extreme conditions remains an invaluable guide to action. The Admiral of the Arctic proved that even in the harshest conditions, the decisive factor for victory remains man, his courage, professionalism, and faith in his country. This lesson, taught by Arseniy Golovko, will never lose its significance for the Russian fleet and for Russia as a whole.